Is that better? Yeah. Great. Okay. I have a low voice. Thanks for coming and being patient. I came in from LA yesterday. Excited to be here. And I have always been a fan of Kane and The Last Poets and all of his affiliations. And yeah, when I talked with Robin about what I was going to meditate on for this and ideas of exile, what came to mind for me is some stuff I've been working on around like gesture and sort of meta gestures within diasporic culture and how they sort of retaliate against our basic stasis, I guess, because there is no real, we flirt with the idea of exodus and fantasize about like maybe leaving. There's been Back to Africa movements and the Black Arts movement, which is something that I feel influences some of the people I love, like Amiri and stuff. And there were times when that became a nationalist movement and when the nationalist movements become like Garveyism or fold into that, but there has never really been an actual, I don't think sincere, like people, Negroes in America, for example, aren't really going back to Africa en masse. That's not a thing, but there is like a bodily form that's happening in, especially around the advent of social media, I think, and the way we've started isolating and mining gesture, and specifically Black gesture and Black speech. Specifically, like on the platform Vine, where there was just like 8 seconds of movement or dialogue, and how that sort of created a lot of mass culture in the US, and I think abroad too, using Black dialect without really realizing it, just because of seeing these like 8-second flashes. And so some of what I'm going to present today is, I have a book coming out called A Jazz Funeral for Uncle Tom, and that book, it's a shorter book that came together with like kind of in that form with meta gestures from another book I'm working on reparations. But this was just sort of a ritual, and me writing this book and realizing like I needed to excise some of that like masculine focused thought on back to like the vertical idea of exodus and exile that was in my mind, to talk about the more, I guess, like fractal form of how we do in consciousness create and seek departure. And so A Jazz Funeral for Uncle Tom is just like a ritual. In the US, a jazz funeral was a ritual that started in New Orleans, like kind of around antebellum, and they were just these like celebrations of life or death that would happen, and they were basically like huge jazz concerts. People would join in, and I was thinking about just what you can lay to rest in that kind of ritual. And with the book, so the book is sort of a call and response, and it starts out, Uncle, what are you listening to? And the respondent says the Black and Crazy Blues, and that's a Rahsaan Roland Kirk song, and then it goes from there, and it sort of references Black culture and accretes into this ritual of like saying goodbye to this idea of Uncle Tom. And so with that, I've made this series of videos that respond to the book, basically, are in conversation with it, and I've wanted to create a ritual, like when I perform the book, when I have it physically, I might do it ritualized with these videos. And so one thing I wanted to try here is to play them at the same time and sort of see how that feels as ritual. And since we don't have access to the other video I made, we'll do that and see how it goes. And then I will also read from the book and stuff like that, whatever I can access. So yeah, the book has a lot of different voices in it, and some of the voices and gestures show up in these. So I'll start here with Sun Ra.
Birds fly over the rainbow. Why, dear, oh, why can't I? Somewhere over. Somewhere. Oh, Tom. I can carry.
You have to play them all at the same time and sort of enact that ritual.
Oh, Tom. I can carry this burden any longer. If I had my way, I'd have been a killer. Tom. If I had my way, I'd have been a killer. You got to go somewhere. Just like the river. If I had my way, I'd have been a killer. They don't stay here. They come here. If I had my way, I'd have been a killer. If I had my way, I'd have been a killer. If I had my way, I'd have been a killer. If I had my way, I'd have been a killer. If I had my way, I'd have been a killer. If I had my way, I'd have been a killer. If I had my way, I'd have been a killer. If I had my way, I'd have been a killer. If I had my way, I'd have been a killer. If I had my way, I'd have been a killer. If I had my way, I'd have been a killer. If I had my way, I'd have been a killer. If I had my way, I'd have been a killer. If I had my way, I'd have been a killer. If I had my way, I'd have been a killer. They don't stay here. They come here and then they leave. What I mean, it's better to leave here alive than to leave here dead. And they got to go somewhere. This plan is just like a railroad station. Everybody always going somewhere. They don't stay here. They come here and then they leave. What I mean, it's better to leave here alive than to leave here dead. And they got to go somewhere. This plan is just like a railroad station. Everybody always. It's like when you go to these beautiful revival meetings at church. And I've heard it. From my background, I've heard people, get so wound up in the music, they're speaking out the tongues, and they don't be putting on. It's like when you go to these beautiful revival meetings at church. From 12 o'clock in the afternoon to 10 o'clock at night, he might be rehearsing. I've heard people. 12 o'clock in the afternoon to 10 o'clock at night, he might be rehearsing. From 12 o'clock in the afternoon to 10 o'clock at night, he might be rehearsing. From 12 o'clock in the afternoon to 10 o'clock at night, he might be rehearsing. From 12 o'clock in the afternoon to 10 o'clock at night, he might be rehearsing. From 12 o'clock in the afternoon to 10 o'clock at night, he might be rehearsing. From 12 o'clock in the afternoon to 10 o'clock at night, he might be rehearsing.
Can I control it from here?
12 o'clock in the afternoon to 10 o'clock at night, he might be
Can we just turn it up or can I control it from here?
12 o'clock in the afternoon
He
to
has,
10 o'clock
yeah.
at night, he might be rehearsing. 12 o'clock in the afternoon to 10 o'clock at night, he might be rehearsing. 12 o'clock in the afternoon to 10 o'clock at night, he might be rehearsing. 12 o'clock in the afternoon to 10 o'clock at night, he might be rehearsing. 12 o'clock in the afternoon to 10 o'clock at night, he might be rehearsing. 12 o'clock in the afternoon to 10 o'clock at night, he might be rehearsing. 12 o'clock in the afternoon to 10 o'clock at night, he might be rehearsing.
So this studio was a 4-track studio.
It was only 4 written on the machine, but I was picking up 20 from the extraterrestrial squad.
On your own Upsetter label.
Yeah,
And
to Upset. It was a war, a musical battle of the Armageddon, a war. What is written there?
so this studio was a 4-track studio.
It was only 4 written on the machine, but I was picking up 20 from the extraterrestrial squad.
On your own Upsetter label.
Yeah,
And
to Upset. It was a war, a musical battle of the Armageddon, a war. What is written there?
so this studio was a 4-track studio.
It was only 4 written on the machine, but I was picking up 20 from the extraterrestrial squad.
On your own Upsetter label.
Yeah,
And
to Upset. It was a war, a musical battle of the Armageddon, a war. What is written there?
so this studio was a 4-track studio.
It was only 4 written on the machine, but I was picking up 20 from the extraterrestrial squad.
On your own Upsetter label.
Yeah,
And
to Upset. It was a war, a musical battle of the Armageddon, a war. What is written?
This whiteness and this bigness. What did that mean? 'Cause, you know, Twitter is only 140 characters. You take out of context. What did it mean?
I mean, with everything, it was a poem about freedom.
On Twitter, you said, I want to be a white rapper.
Yes.
You said, I want to be so white, I'm the biggest rapper of all time.
Big and white.
What if everyone starts to be big and white? What if this works for everyone and everyone can experience this whiteness and this bigness? What did that mean? 'Cause, you know, Twitter is only 140 characters. You take out of context. What did it mean?
I mean, with everything, it was a poem about freedom.
On Twitter, you said, I want to be a white rapper.
Yes.
You said, I want to be so white, I'm the biggest rapper of all time.
Big and white.
What if everyone starts to be big and white? What if this works for everyone and everyone can experience this whiteness and this bigness? What did that mean? 'Cause, you know, Twitter is only 140 characters. You take out of context. What did it mean?
I mean, with everything, it was a poem about freedom.
Spirit. On Twitter, you said, I want to be a white rapper.
Yes.
You said, I want to be
Waiting for the answering sound. It finally came. Look, you can read it yourself. There shall be no more killing. Peace. 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 Music, wisdom, love, peace. Reward was tranquility, and I ride all day on an elephant. I am as healthy as rhythm, music. I asked the spirit. We waited for.
Take me to the water. Take me to. I know one thing from another. Take me to. I know one thing from another. I'm afflicted. I know one thing from another. I'm afflicted. I know one thing from another. I'm afflicted. I know one thing from another.
Ain't it sisters, period. Remember in the old days when you could beat up a woman? Remember that shit back in the 20s? Guys just smack their wives and move their psh, and just go, oh. You can't do shit like that no more. Women be taking aerobics and they'll fuck you up. It's scary too, man. Especially a black woman. You hit a black woman, she lose her mind. Seriously, they go crazy on you. You can have a real timid sister for a girl and smack it and be like, I'm gonna kill you, motherfucker. You know that shit. No, motherfucker, you don't. You can't hit. Period. Remember in the old days when you could beat up a woman? Remember that shit back in the 20s? Guys just smack their wives and move their psh, and then just go.
I know one thing from
You can't do shit like that. Women be taking aerobics and
Answering sound.
What if everyone was big and white? What if this works for everyone? Everyone can experience this whiteness and this big thing. What that mean? Only 140 characters.
So this video was a 4-track. I mean, with everything. I was only 14 on the machine, but I was picking up 20.
They won't believe me.
By the extraterrestrials.
And they don't see. It's like I used to be. Working right behind the gun.
What is written there?
You're supposed to time a steady shot.
I was only 14 on the machine, but I was picking up 20. By the extraterrestrials.
But he won't believe me. Like I used to be.
speak to a lot of what I was thinking of with the idea of like meta gestures, which are, I feel like, especially looking at media and access to archives online and social media and the infinite like presence that creates, these gestures kind of like get trapped in that space. And I have been working with poetics and with like sound and image on pulling them out, sort of, or like isolating those things and trying to figure out what that does. And so it was interesting. I don't know how it was to watch, but it was interesting to me to hear like what voices come through, because it's kind of almost like the act of thinking with all of those things in your mind at the same time that are always running coterminally now. And if you're preoccupied with the things that Kane or I or other people are preoccupied with, it's kind of like how it sounds in your mind, maybe. So yeah, I think I'm gonna read some because I don't think that we're gonna be able to see that video that I brought. I had some stuff I wanted to show, but hopefully, if that's okay, I'll do some reading and we'll discuss. Are there any questions about the videos before I go on and read? No? Okay. Switch. That, the Eddie Murphy clip, I don't know if you guys know who, he was the one in the red leather, but that, so some of the genesis of this book and my thinking is like also just growing up around certain elements of Black culture because of my family history. My dad was a singer, and my mom, after he passed away, kind of was still around Hollywood and the Inquirer. Like one of her friends got beaten up by Eddie Murphy, and it was in the, I just remember being a kid and saying like, why did Bridget like get all this money all of a sudden? Like what the hell happened? And she had had this like settlement with Gloria Allred, and that was before that kind of thing happened in the media. And so some of it was just like me thinking about the ways masculinity had shown up like that around men I consider like kind of like very public Uncle Tom type figures, and how they've gone on and what those vectors look like versus how other affiliates of theirs go on and things like that. So. Okay. Sweet. When I read, regardless of whether or not I've had a performance prepared, I always use archival material, or I usually do, because it's usually kind of a part of my writing or stuff that I write with. And with this theme of exile, I've been thinking a lot about Albert Ayler, and I don't know if you guys know who Albert Ayler is at all. For those who don't, he was an avant-garde-ish jazz musician who kind of mysteriously, it's said that he committed suicide, but his death, there's a lot of mystery around it. They never really found the body, and it was, he had this like blooming career, and then he went to the army, and there's an interview with Don Cherry where he talks about it extensively, and he's like, he wasn't the kind of guy who should go to the army, and then it sort of cuts off cryptically, and there are all these sort of commentaries on Albert Ayler that are like that, and he just had a really beautiful speaking voice, and so let's listen to it if we can.
I played back when I was about 8 years old. My father made me play the saxophone and so forth. So when I was in high school, I played first chair. I played oboe there. And then on through high school, I played golf also. And when I graduated from high school, I went to college for 1 year, but due to the fact that money wasn't strong enough, I had to leave college. So therefore, I had to think of a different way to go. So from there, I went to the Army, and I stayed for a little while, and there I developed, I met quite a few guys, good musicians that helped me, and I helped them feel wise. And I had always wanted to come to the Scandinavian countries. I'd heard a lot about the Scandinavian people, so I had my opportunity. I saved quite a bit of money. Then when I come over here, I feel quite free, really free. I feel free over here, and it's one day everything will be as it should be.
Jazz Funeral for Uncle Tom. A place to be glad. I'll actually start. This book starts out with a couple quotes. Better to leave here alive than to leave here dead, which is Sun Ra, something he just like said in passing, like all the weird stuff he says in passing. And you probably saw that up on the video. And If I'd Had My Way, It'd Have Been a Killer by Nina Simone. Place to be glad. Afro-Asiatic spastic tickle in my throat when I go for it. Did you know there's sugar in the ocean tangled like slow laughter in the weeds? Did you unload the gun and remember a shard of coral calcium and send a trance yawning for sunny mirrors before it lunged into your artery a clearing? Either way, you're gone, and I want to be honest, I celebrated. I danced on the blunt glass of your nectarine attitude and sipped the bloody mud packs of my own deliberate footprints along the way, fasted on that blood until you came back, and my throat constricted in a two-faced seizure of hope and dread. Resurrection is petty, a hustle, a hassle. I love you, I'm so glad. A Fenny Run. He kissed the glass, I kissed the glass. Jasmine Guy had an appetite for the quiet witnessing of it, of our pitiful affection. We had the bridled reluctance of trial day. We read Jean Genet aloud together, fools that we are, and as radiant, his dirty mouth arousing rejoice, and Moriers again. The flowers were rude slabs of bamboo and sambo, and in that sterile elsewhere we planted a mayor, a mother, a most way club of sugar and rage. I could see her cracking open with cyanide and favorite child dope, apple, that rope again, that noose again, that no spine in the bell again, screaming, I can't kick this when it hits, whispering, it's a boy, nigga, get me out of this ribbon, satin chokehold alive. Dizzy run. Tombe lentement vers la terre, fall slowly toward the earth. You've been sent back to repair yourself. Stravinsky's Virgin has returned to dance herself into eternity, and we all gotta jump back and kiss ourselves. Feel lucky in the swell and shuck of Ellison's elegant deja vu. We all thought about leaving just to seize the grandeur of return, to notice something new about the space between the two front teeth of queens on the altar posing as wall. Keep hearing flutes and Luca. Heard your very own daughter had to sue you just to see you. Brought before the U.S. Supreme Court, 2 blue bloods, a widow and a child. Divvy up Tunisia while the womb erodes. That eager dimple of yours beneath the cold wheel of karma makes a road, makes a stray, makes a traveler, makes another daughter of dust, pushing an empty stroller across the on-ramp. Why are there so many men in the sun pushing empty strollers from Salvation Army? So many ghosts in their roll-up on and supplies. Ponderous devastation. The highest highs are for the fallen. Your indented cheek tastes like the shed skin of gnats, your trumpet fat with maggots, your widow fat with greed, your secret baby 40, and Mafa on her knees helping her gather the last of you and make it say her name. So there are prose poems in this book, and they're interwoven with the call and response. For example, what happened to sanity? Have you seen the new NASA baby tease? And it just goes, so there's like a whole conversation kind of happening in the book around the prose poems. I would love to read some stuff that I can't access, but I'm just gonna keep reading, and maybe I'll play some more audio stuff because I wanted to do more media. But all right, Kipling-esque. You can't do anything right. Your curiosity is violent, your empathy is false, your sympathy offensive, your apology is primitive, your music is sick with envy, your muses are sick with lust, your limp doesn't lean, your straight line is a wink, your whimper catches December ditching homeroom and only then realizes you stole somebody's name. Your sister brags about anal on the first date, your reprimand is an amp pumping moth into the trunk, your clamor is at Walmart, your brothers hustle codeine, your table is covered in mugshots and cocaine. Sorry. You love the way we taste. You ate my daddy, ground his bones into free rides daily. Then he was on your sweatshirt on the first day of school. You are a pig. You are the slave. You are why I'm yellow. You ate at Waffle House on purpose. Your arrogance is how I'm turning gold. Maybe I can rescue you from your myths about yourself. Maybe I can hide your cadence and break your name into mine. Maybe I can convince you to hand over your children on Sundays, and I'll teach them to worship Orishas who each one looks like me. Maybe I can tell you to fear your dreams, unless they are about everything coming true after death. If you are decent, if you obey me, if you say sorry or please every time I see you smiling, if you let me show you what civilized people do when they aren't being conquered, raped, ruined, if you let me borrow your heart, if you rip out your heart and plant it inside me, and then let me eat your bloody hand, if you let me beat you from that central territory and walk through the actual broken glass of my area code to watch me take my father to the grave. The one you ate, the one whose blood you tasted, the one who holds your hand, the one who made you into your brutal, savage self again. Coin, coin, run. Damn, son, he grunted, holding his falling jeans and sprinting sideways on high hay and concatenation. He hadn't even wanted to chase the favor. He hadn't planned to live forever. He didn't know he had a fever, thought it was a true love shopping spree. Thought the cotton needle was a vaccine, thought the Visine was tiny water, thought the eye a reliable bank in the space between seeing and being seen, and plenty quenched and hesitant, addicted to fickle sonance and espionage, fake Prada, real caught up, ketchup packets spilling from his pockets, Dexter Gordon flickering in his locket, on grin, on roar, on dimples and porridge. Is this your typical rollout strategy? Pretend to shift into helpless chaos and laugh when they fall for it, with such tall grass and old mist, such that the mystery of the body, of the boy, of the ball, is leaping violently into pinstripes. He was isolated, yes, but never made us nervous. He was never convicted. He never took that backpack. He never made it to Rikers. He never did come back. Maybe I'll read one more and then I'll play some audio. It's called The Blackbird Singing, or Just After. Then I noticed on the anniversary of your death this cheerfulness, how proud I am of a voyager, a seer. I overheard the guy with the ash between his eyebrows and Prince's former assistant, who now works at my local crystal dealer, Liberate Emporium. I go in for cinnamon incense and to test my intuition and drink the grapefruit cayenne juice in the comfort of a telegraph. They were discussing what happens when a bullet enters the flesh, how it's not the impact that hurts, but the gunpowder searing your inner organs, burning them on contact. The flame once lit, leveraged as potential. Like all trauma, the sentient ram is mostly calm in the smirk, in the aftermath, slower than everything happening, clearer. Deserted riverbanks becoming mirrors. The finger you shot off has never been didactic, never wagged, never asked for the nerve back, had the nerve to know better, to grow a palate there, a dialect, new flesh. I'm so proud of you. Mom told me the news the day after Valentine's Day in Grandma and Grandpa's hallway in stucco San Diego. Everything so clean and quiet. You could hear the clock's constant ticking and crickets and the grasshopper that landed on my shoulder and smiled. She told me about the new place you had traveled to and then collapsed, sobbing. I'm so proud of you. You're so jubilant and dignified on the other side, with Ruth and Elijah and some brides, and your love higher and higher, and the last cut of the last scream is laughter. It was like we were in two different places, hearing two different stories. While she wept, I gathered that openness, pleasure in my eyes, the deliberate calm of retreat, the ecstasy of never mind. I'm so proud of you, so proud to be of you, so happy for you, so through with sadness, so new and ruthless, and you and Ruth and Elijah and all the distant cousins and all the bloody gloves and all the loose myths about all of us, and the way you sing Save Me like Nina Simone does, but really mean it and really prove what it means to build a bridge, to walk the muted water. I'm so proud of the proof of you, of the bruises that healed while the comfort came, all our songs, all of our effort turned into ease. The wounds went away or went blind or ran off on the cinder, but the songs are still here. It was Ash Wednesday in the year of our Lord, Anno Domini something or other. Prince died on my birthday, Nina Simone too. I love tribes. I love that late April makes people feel safe to take off and slay the stiff lion that looms in the yard with the lemons and Maffa just learning her name. And the deacon on the lot we bought in Atlanta, and tips of tongues skipping like pamphlets. We don't need communism anymore. We don't need to sound smart about that dumb shit. We don't need to do crunches in the padded cell. I'm so proud of you, so full of truth and hours. Thank you for going over there, for being here and there, for the new grass, for the magnetic tape, and the way stitches disappear into skin like the quick indigo grin of morning. You make me proud as all disappearing. You set me free as a near intention. You ask me to sing about it too now, or teach me, or through me. So I'm so proud. I'm so proud. Cool.
windows, he's snatching your people up, trying to rape them, so y'all need to hide your kids, hide your wife, and hide your husband, because they're raping everybody out here.
What they didn't show, and will never show, that famous picture King was shot. Those 5 people pointing up. Nobody ever said how they know it wasn't going to be another shot. How they know that wasn't a bunch of redneck claners who come down there and kill everybody on the night? They not know that. And when you see that picture, get a good look at it, because the king's on the ground and nobody's ever over him. That's how staged this picture was.
Performance in the second half of the week. I'm thankful.
Because you don't need words to have ideas. You see, when the ideas are in the sound, because you don't need words. black people, 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 black.
What's funny? But unfortunately, he never lost his way. Jaded hawk leaking offbeat, playful lark in a leap of museum styrofoam objective transformation from black lungs in coal country to black longing and stolen brass he found it in a taxi, my hot comb bandit, and the picture of Eric he carried and pasted on hotel walls. Don't be afraid, don't be alarmed, there's no more karma, there's no greater charm in good behavior than in murder. Include the faceless machine, dress for a post-human planet, play some music. I'm taking the disc to the Google robot, she listens. Let's see what she's gonna play. Let's trust an invasion of fate again and again, an obsession with the mescaline Ziploc, Swarovski Ziploc. What would Zukovsky or Tristan do? She plays Frank Ocean's Bicycle, the robot does, or a dose to follow close. The gift of the black tropics is not wheels, but slow braiding in a field on Sunday, burnt remembering and Paul Mooney shimmering renunciation, the Ghanaian Olympian dancing in his sled, red, yellow, and green, tepid oblivion isn't an option, and the hot nothingness of the song singes indifferent flesh into shadow. I have to admit, I celebrated. All right, I'll stop there, because, yeah. Definitely want to open it up to questions because I feel like we can bring more out. I had a whole paper on exile to read and stuff, so maybe we can like discuss some of that, or any questions on the work, or is there time for that? Okay, great.
It's totally time.
Okay.
I just ask you to speak into the microphone when you ask your question. Thank you.
I try not to eat first. No one else. Hi, thank you very much for sharing that material and the process as well. I think that something that was very nice was the way in which you were working. I especially liked the very beginning with all that archival material on Tumblr page. Cool. I had a start of an argument yesterday, and it was around the notion of citation and how knowledge is transmitted, right? And I'm in the camp of citation. I really like citation. I really enjoyed what you've done with it. But that person was arguing that knowledge, or there's perhaps a greater knowledge which when is embodied, and that citation has this kind of authority to it, right? And I was trying to stay away of citation. You use a lot of them, right? You are in dialogue, in chorus with a lot of persons. So perhaps could you talk about that and how maybe that is not antinomous to corporal knowledge as well, as you also work with that?
Absolutely, yeah. I have mixed feelings about citation. I feel like I'm on both sides of that argument at different times. But I think they also work best together. Like, I think the body does the citation. That's sort of the feel I'm thinking of in that ritual of like playing everything at once. Like the body is kind of this filter that is always citing its influences. And that's, nice and a Neverland way, but then you do want to know sources. And so I think on the one hand, you can cite in an embodied way in a text by naming names. And sometimes aesthetically, because I privilege experience, especially on the page, I don't necessarily want to go and footnote and take someone out of a reading experience by citing in traditional ways. So I'm always looking for non-traditional ways to cite. And a lot of that, I think, becomes call and response and chorus, because you can echo and other people can say the names without you having to, do that very like classical, I think there's also something, I don't like the word, but kind of hegemonic about like the ways that we're forced to cite in academia versus the ways that natural citation happens. And kind of also what I'm thinking about in a lot of this work, or just in general, is like griot culture and the idea that, memory, and especially now, like epigenetics is like this really popular thing, but I think we've always known that we carry memory and experience from past generations in our bodies, either genetically or just in the way we speak or how we remember. So I feel like relying on memory has been something that has been important to me recently, especially because you can rely too much on what's available, because we think everything is at our fingertips on Google. But for example, with this Albert Eiler research, there's a documentary on him, My Name is Albert Eiler, that came out in like 2005, and it was made by a Swedish director, and it used to just be on YouTube, and I was going to mix it for the thing I was gonna play, and I couldn't find it. I'm like, oh, it'll always be there, but back in the day I didn't download and save things that I found there that you couldn't buy on DVD, and so I had to go find the director, and now I'm in conversation with him, so that's fun to, meet people that way, but I would have preferred to just be able to get the material somewhere online. So, I don't know. I really love citation, but I think we need to find new ways to do it so that everyone does it more.
So we don't lose it.
So it seems like you're talking about an idea of kind of, you get to see, as he was saying, kind of this embodied knowledge, and then you're citing that, and we get to kind of experientially, deal with the overlay. Can you talk a bit about how, for you, that works towards, I guess, some kind of politic around this idea of exile in a diasporic context?
Yeah, definitely. Well, like what I started touching on in the beginning was like my thinking around this is just that the body is where, like I guess to be more specific, the quotidian, like everyday gestures that we do are where we hide our moments of deepest exile. So like for Nina Simone, she would perform, and that was her profession, and she was hired to do it, and she was, kind of a mercenary in that way. But within her performances, she would go off in these crazy ways that were her both expressing exile, because I think she specifically felt very exiled, but also her kind of like liberation strategy. And it's really interesting. One thing I love doing when I'm doing this kind of work or thinking about this stuff is reading YouTube comments, because there's so much ignorance and the occasional glimmer of genius or interestingness at least, but a lot of it's just like, wow, that's sad, she was bipolar, and just like very, limited readings of what's actually going on in those moments. But that's Nina Simone. She's an icon. And then thinking about like those kids dancing, that's also a moment, I think, where there's an embodied moment of dealing with a certain kind of exile that's really pronounced because of the contrast of how the kids move and how racialized it is in that particular clip. So I feel like bodies in exile are constantly using everyday material to express either pleas or just like kind of almost like codes and maps to other destinations that you don't, and they're missed because it's almost imperceptible. It's in that like one wave of a hand, or it's like the comment where someone's going off that wasn't what was on the script, or even like this where you come in having some like thing to do that was a lot more monolithic, and then it's like, oh, guess we're gonna, it's like this is not the greatest example, but in improvised moments, I think that's where exile makes the most sense to me, or I see diasporic bodies like working through exile the most, and also maybe like reveling in it and using it as a kind of material. But basically what I'm saying is like there's almost like there's a multi-dimensionality, or like the Dubois like double consciousness happening, I think, in those moments too, where you're here but you're also elsewhere, because in a way the black body in its full manifestation is always in exile in the West. There's no, if we were to really be who we are, that's not a thing. And then there's also like systems of forgetting. Like I was sampling some Red Fox for the video I was going to play, and he talks about language a lot in interesting ways. And he was like, yeah, you guys forget like Southern whites taught, Black Americans how to speak English. So all this stuff like you make fun of, that's y'all, as they would say. So sometimes, there's like solidarity in those moments that seem like exilic. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, first, I'd like to thank you for your presentation. I recently read your article on Bomb magazine about the microdosing of psilocybin. And I thought that it would be interesting to kind of discuss the link between use of drugs and exile, and if you would make a difference between using drugs as a way to put the body into exile, or comparing that with escapism, for example. Like, what's your opinion on that? And maybe you could discuss more this idea of using drug as a way of escaping.
I think, first of all, I think music is a kind of drug in that sense, and has been when we didn't have access as much to like harder drugs. I think there were moments of trance that come from like every tradition probably, but I think that slaves in every region were probably using music as a kind of to get into an altered state, and so it makes sense that now a lot of the drug use is promoted or like revolves around music and industry, stuff like that. But it was interesting researching for that article. There were two camps there were several camps, but so basically in Silicon Valley, a lot of people are microdosing psilocybin and LSD before, like for work, and they're using it as like an antidepressant, but they're calling it, basically they're trying to hack the body. And I think really they just have so much time and money on their hands, and they're so bored and don't understand why they feel depleted with all this, they're the richest place in the world, but they feel like nothing, creatively plateauing. And so drugs are helping them get out of that. So that was the one like very privileged camp. But then there's this like Hotep type, like, Africanist, I don't even know what to call it. It's basically like Hotep YouTube, but like black scholars who aren't in academia. So it's sad that it gets marginalized in that way, but that's basically what it is and how it's dismissed. And in that camp, there's this one researcher who is an Egyptologist, or he studies Kemet, he calls it, and he believes that if you megadose psilocybin and go to the pyramids, they become, I think I wrote that in the article, but they become a DVD. And so they become like they were supposed to be experienced on heavy doses of mushrooms. And he links climate change to why mushrooms weren't done, why people lost track of that. Basically, like agriculture came in because there was desertification. Only the priest could access the mushroom, so they would then create that hierarchy of priesthood to farmer and civilian, where they would have to tell the lay people what was on the pyramids and give them those messages, because only certain people could do drugs all day. Other people had to make food and stuff. So that definitely makes me think about exile and just ideas also of like myth making, which some of my favorite like marginalized people think about, like Sun Ra, or even Amiri talks a little bit about it, but just the idea that we don't have any myths in the African diaspora. And so automatically you're in a state of like no man's land / exile when you don't have myths. And the idea that if you do use drugs help you create mythology. And so there's so much mythologizing around drugs. Even if you look at like trap music now, there's the mythologizing of figures in popular culture as, drug dealers, or they just help us access myths that we would otherwise like blow off probably. So I think they definitely have a place, maybe less like sacred now than in the past, because I think psychedelics, I don't know, they're not the most popular drug among Black people, which is sad maybe. Or it's not, I don't know, it is what it is. Any other?
Can I ask you a question?
Yes,
but
please.
Also, thank you for playing that Albert Eiler.
Oh yeah.
I've never heard his voice.
His voice is amazing. It sounds like his playing. You can tell it's like one line of person.
So I was going to ask you about what are you listening for in those players' voices?
On his voice, because I was specifically listening to him to think about how he felt as a kind of exile, from both because in the jazz community, people would scream and leave his concerts. He was before his time. So on the one hand, there was John Coltrane saying, "You're the best there is, and keep doing what you're doing," or even like all sorts of people would say that. But on the other hand, people at his concerts would get up and scream no, literally, and like walk out. So he was in exile from his community and the musicians he was working with. And then at the same time, he's in the U.S. Army. And as he said, he feels most comfortable outside of the U.S. and he likes golf. And so he was just like a weird Black guy before it was okay to be a weird Black. It's barely okay now, unless you're on TV. But I think I'm listening for like authenticity is like a dumbed down way of saying it, but just like the continuity of deed and word, I guess, like does how you speak make sense to, in relation to how you like inhabit the world, I don't know. Voice is like really important to me, I think, because I grew up listening to my dad sing more than I grew up around him. And so I learned to like learn a lot about people, or decide that I could learn a lot about people, whether or not it's accurate, from hearing how they speak, kind of. Just like those cadences. And also just like the griot. I think it's somewhere in diasporic bodies to want to hear people tell stories, more to listen as a form of, intuitive reading, I guess. So yeah. And we just know, I think, it's not something we really talk about in Western thought as much, but we know when someone has a beautiful voice, or like when someone's voice is hitting us a certain way, even when they're just like talking. I feel like it's, yeah. I don't know.
Hi. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your own experience of diaspora or even of exile.
My own, it's hard to, thank you for asking that, but like my own experience of exile, it's all over the place. you know, on a personal level, racially growing up, I'm biracial, so growing up in a family that didn't expect to have black family members, there's that element, and especially because my dad wasn't necessarily around, so there was no like proof. So a lot of growing up, especially in Los Angeles, people are racist. So if they see like a white woman with black kids, a lot of people would come up to us in the grocery store. I mean, this is just like basic, those everyday moments, like black men would come up and be like, why do you have those black kids? Or just crazy stuff happens when you're, you know, around race, when you're someone who's signifying people's triggers or confusions about race. So there was, I mean, I've always felt pretty grounded myself, I think maybe because I don't pay as much attention to my own like discomfort around that as I do to other people's, but I grew up like dancing in an all black dance environment, and so there was, I guess I had a mild experience of exile because, you know, I didn't really pay much attention to it, but there were always moments of like colorism and things like that when you're biracial or whatever, just the way shit works in society. You know, like there were moments when people I was friends with would get, like I wouldn't notice as much, but like getting cast in things or picked to do like a lead in a dance or something like that, and feeling like, oh, this is like about being high, you know, my color versus, you know, just like always having a little bit of guilt around certain things like that. But then also, I mean, just wanting to be in the arts and wanting to be a poet or dancer or do all the weird stuff I do, I think there's a willful exile. But I think a lot of people into the stuff I'm into, like I think it's a state that we impose on ourselves. I think about that with Kane a little bit too. Like there's a certain amount of like, like James Baldwin, a lot of people leave, and so I think we exile ourselves sometimes in order to get the work done without too much influence, or I don't know.
Yeah, like so, like with the flip side of exile is like this kind of idea of return. Is that something like? Is there an image of return that sort of guides what you do, or what you're thinking about, or how you're thinking through certain artists, or yeah, does that come into it at all?
Definitely. The question that I am like hung on, or like the cliffhanger, is like, what are we returning to? But then that brought me, so the book I'm working on that this Uncle Tom book sort of intervened on is called Mafa, which is the name for the African Holocaust. But it's like an epic poem about a woman with that name. But we don't use that word, and I think because we don't name why the diaspora is what it is as commonly as we do for like the Holocaust or something, for example. Like if you say the word Mafa, most people, how many people have heard that word? Yeah, it's not a common word, but if you say the Holocaust, I think most people would have heard of that, you know? So it's like, I think the first return is to our own consciousness of how we define, even me, like when you ask that question and I'm stumped, it's like, how much are we actually looking at what we internalize as like a natural born state of exile, and how do we return to like thinking about ourselves as we are honestly in this space in order to even think about either exile or return. So I think some of it is just like return to a kind of honest conversation, and then that brings me to ideas which I've been writing about recently of radicalization, and because I think it takes radicalization to start those conversations, and there's a whole like post-68, you know, that just kind of dropped off. So what would it take, what kind of language or synthesis does it take to radicalize us back into attention to our own discomfort in a way, you know, because assimilation is at a certain point where we don't really talk about it, or if we do, we're kind of being redundant. If we talk about reparations or, you know, it's like it's all been diluted and like stolen from us in a way, our own ability to conceive of that. So yeah, I just dream about a return to a community where it's a part of the discussion. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Sorry about the, shenanigans, but